We want to welcome you to the Dallas Independent School District STEM Environmental Education Center virtual field trip. We want to say a very special welcome to Lorenzo De Zavala, Stevens Park, O.M. Roberts, G.W. Truitt, J.W. Carpenter, Martin Weiss, Casa View, Seagoville North, Lakewood, Chapel Hill, Peabody, Harley, McNair, Hogg New Tech, and Zaragoza, all of the Dallas Independent School District, and Indian Creek from the Southwest Independent School District. Teachers, if you're watching and you're not signed up, please do so. Go to www.tiny.cc/PK-2 registration and sign up for us, please. We appreciate it. The program today will be properties of soil. During this virtual field trip, students will observe and compare components of soil by size, texture, and color. Types of soil by Mr. Dominguez. Mr. Ramirez will cover color and texture. Size and shape by Ms. Schramm, and the usefulness of soil by Mr. Monroe. Students, during this program, you cannot ask us a verbal question, but you can go to www.tiny.cc/question-answer. Send in your question. We'll do our best to answer them for you. If I can't get to them during the program, I'll send them to your teacher and they can discuss them with you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Mr. Dominguez is going to tell you all about the different types of soil.
Hola amigos, en esta parte de su paseo virtual vamos a explorar la Tierra. Vamos a responder la pregunta ¿qué es la Tierra? Vamos a ver qué animales podemos encontrar viviendo no solamente arriba de la Tierra, pero también adentro de la Tierra. Y también les voy a enseñar 3 diferentes tipos de rocas y vamos a explorar las características de cada roca. Alright guys, so in this part of your virtual field trip, we are going to be talking about soil. So we're going to answer the question, what is soil? And we're also going to see what animals we can find not only living on top of the soil, but in the soil. And I have 3 rocks to show you guys, and we are going to explore the characteristics of each one of those rocks. So guys, let's get started. Ok amigos, la primera cosa que voy a hacer es agarrar un poquito de tierra para poder examinar los contenidos y para poder responder a la pregunta ¿qué es la tierra? All right, friends, so the first thing I'm going to do is grab a sample of soil so we can answer that first question. What is soil? So we're going to examine the contents of the soil to figure that out. So let's grab our sample. And we're also going to see if we can find any interesting animals living in the soil. También vamos a ver si podemos encontrar algunos animales interesantes viviendo en esta tierra. Y vamos a usar una lupa para examinar la tierra. So we're going to use a magnifying glass to examine this dirt. So we're going to take this dirt inside so we can do that. Vamos a llevar esta tierra adentro para poder examinarla más bien. Pero vamos a agarrar un poquito más y a ver qué podemos encontrar. Ya miro unas raíces. La tierra es muy importante para las plantas, ¿verdad? Ok amigos, ya estoy adentro y para que no se me escape nada, voy a poner los contenidos de mi tierra aquí adentro de esta otra caja de plástico y vamos a ver qué podemos encontrar. Alright guys, so I'm back inside and so nothing escapes. What I am going to do is I am going to put the contents of my dirt, of my soil, inside this plastic container. So let's see what we can find, okay? And remember, we are going to use my magnifying glass to see what we can find living or non-living, okay? So let's get started and let me give you guys a better view of what we find. Ok amigos, vamos a explorar qué podemos encontrar en nuestra tierra. All right friends, let's see what soil is made out of. Let's see what we can find in soil. Ok, amigos, vamos a ver qué podemos encontrar en nuestra tierra. All right, friends, so let's see what we can find in our soil. So I already see some pretty interesting things, and you guys are probably seeing what I'm seeing, and I see some worms. Miro unos gusanos. ¿Los miran? Y estos son los gusanos que uso para comida para mis gallinas. So these are actually some of the worms that I use to feed some of my chickens. So they live in the soil, well, the ones that got away. So these are pretty cool. ¿Qué más miro? Miro parte de un árbol, una hoja, ¿verdad? So I see part of a tree. So a leaf, right? So I see some non-living things. I see a rock. Miro una roca. Una roca no está viva, ¿verdad? ¿Qué más puedo mirar? So what else do I see? Miro lodo. So I see some mud. And it looks like there's some sand in this mud. Se mira como arena en este lodo. Let's see what else. Oh, mira lo que tenemos aquí. Tenemos un insecto. Hay muchas cosas vivas que viven en la tierra, ¿verdad? So I see a insect. There's lots of living things in our dirt, in our soil. So let's see what else I can find. So I have some wood. It might have been from a tree or maybe from something else, but that doesn't look like bark to me. Let's see, what else do we have? We have some more rocks. These rocks are a little bit different in color. They're more white in color. And we'll talk about rocks in a little bit. Encontré otras rocas que se miran un poquito diferente en color, ¿verdad? Son blancas. Y vamos a hablar de rocas un poquito más en un momento. Lo que estoy mirando es que la tierra está hecha de cosas que son vivas y no vivas. De roca, de arena, de hojas, de lodo, de arena. Muchas cosas diferentes, ¿verdad? Entonces pienso que podemos decir que la tierra consiste de una mezcla de cosas vivas y no vivas. De cosas como arena, de cosas como lodo, de rocas, de cosas vivas como insectos, gusanos. So I think it's safe to say that soil is made out of both living and non-living things. All right, guys, before you go today, I wanted to talk some more about rocks. And we already know that rocks are an important part of soil, but I wanted to talk some more about their individual characteristics. And there's all types of rocks. So the first characteristic that I want to talk about is color. Do you guys see different colors? I do. I see gray, I see some black, some red, some pink, some white. So there's some black rocks right there, and some brown. So rocks come in all different colors. Now, another characteristic that we can talk about is texture. Now, what is that big word, texture? Well, texture just describes what something feels like. Now, just by looking at this rock, what do you think it feels like? Well, I'll tell you, it feels very bumpy. It's very rough. So if you were to fall on this rock, you would probably get a bunch of scratches. We don't want that. Now, this rock over here feels very smooth, but it's very sharp. So don't cut yourself with this rock. This rock is actually one of my favorite rocks. It's called obsidian. So now, another way that we can tell rocks apart, or another important characteristic of rocks, is how heavy they feel, or their weight. Now, this rock feels pretty heavy. And even though this rock looks pretty big. It's actually very light. Now this rock is called pumice, and it's actually a very light rock. So rocks come in different weights. Now, the last characteristic that I want to talk about is how hard these rocks can be. Now, this rock, even though it looks pretty hard, it's actually not. In fact, check this out. What did I just do? I just broke it. This rock is very brittle. Now, I wonder if I can do the same thing with this rock. Let's see. Nope. This is a very hard rock, so I can't break it. This one is very brittle, which means I can break it pretty easily. So some rocks are hard, some rocks are very brittle. Now, the last rock I want to show you guys is pretty special because check it out. What does it have? It's a fossil. So sometimes you get lucky and you find some fossils in rock. All right, guys, I hope that you guys learned a little something about rocks and soil today. I hope you enjoyed this part of your virtual field trip. I will see you guys next time.
Thank you, Mr. Dominguez. And the question is, what are the different types of soil? Clay, sandy, silty, peaty, chalky, and loamy. Out here we have clay, much clay. Now, Ms. Ramirez is going to talk to you about color and texture.
Hello, my name is Ms. Ramirez, and a special welcome to Casa View. So we're going to be learning about the color and texture of soil. So before we do that, I do have an animal friend. So I'm going to give you some clues to who this animal friend is, and then I'll let you guys guess. This animal friend has 4 legs, a long tail, a beard of skin underneath his chin, spikes on his body, and they come from the desert. Now, because this is a desert animal, he actually blends in with this type of rock. This is called sandstone, and it gets that name because it's made out of sand particles, and I have some sand particles here. So this sand actually comes together to make sandstone, and this animal friend can camouflage or hide very well and blend in with this color. So this animal has camouflage, and it happens to be almost the same color as this rock or sand. So go ahead and give me a guess what animal you think this is, and I'll go pull him out. If you guessed a type of lizard, you would be correct. This is Spike, and he is a bearded dragon lizard. You probably met him before, but for those that have not, he gets that name bearded dragon because he has a beard of skin underneath his chin. When he gets scared or mad, he can inflate it really big to scare off predators. Notice the color of his scales. He is very similar in color to this rock and to the sand that you guys saw earlier. So again, he has excellent camouflage. He can blend in. So I'm going to put our animal friend up and we'll start our little presentation. Since y'all are not able to be with us right now, I do have a little video of the EEC and some of the soil that we have here. So I'm going to stop my video and share my screen with you guys so we can look at some soil. So here is the EEC. This is one of my garden areas. So as we explore this area, think about what kind of soil is best for plants. What are some things that you guys can see? And also think, what color and texture is this soil? And what do you guys see here? So maybe tell your friend beside you, what can you see? What do you notice? What do you observe about the color and the texture of the potting soil? Now, to review, color is simply using your eyes and being able to determine what colors you see. So for example, we have green leaves and purple flowers. Texture means if you guys were to use your hands to touch these things, how would they feel? Would they feel soft or rough or bumpy? So that potting soil was kind of like a black or dark brown in color. And when I touched it, it had a soft texture. It also had lots of nutrients for our plants to grow. So let's take a look at some other soil at the Environmental Center. See if you can describe the color and texture of this soil. And notice, why do you think there are less plants in this area? Do you think this type of soil is better or worse for plants to live in? Now, this is my special science tool. It's called a soil auger. It's just a tube that you guys can put in the ground. You push it in there and it gives you a sample of soil. Now, when I tried to push it in this soil, it was super hard to push through. I had to use both hands to push this special science tool all the way through into the soil. Notice the color. What color is that soil? And how do you think this soil might feel? So remember the first soil that you guys saw was black. What color is this soil? Notice the size of the particles that make up this soil as well. And something cool about this soil, when I was squishing it with my hands, it actually formed a ball. So when it's wet, this soil will actually keep its shape. I can mold it into different things. And this is a special type of soil called clay. So hopefully you guys noticed that the color of this clay soil was a reddish brown color. Very different from the dark black potting soil that you guys saw earlier. So again, that was clay. Here's a different location. This is across the street in our forest. So see if you can describe the soil color and the texture. So how do you think this soil might feel? And also think about, how is this site different from the other sites we looked at? So again, this is in our forest. What do you guys see? I noticed there's a lot more trees over here, and there's a lot more stuff on the ground. There's a lot more leaves on the ground. So look at the color. How can you describe the color of the soil? This soil was also super hard to push through. I had to use both my hands. Notice the color. How is it different from the other two soils? And I'm going to touch it so that I can determine the texture. When I touch it and try to roll it into a ball, it did not want to stay in a ball. It crumbled. There's also some pieces inside the soil. What do you guys think these long pieces are? What do they look like? They're actually plant roots. So this type of soil had a lot of plant material. It had roots and leftover leaves and sticks and twigs in it. And the color of this soil, it's a lot darker. It's almost like the potting soil. It's dark black or brown. This soil was loamy soil, meaning that it's a mixture of sand and clay and silt. And it also had humus. That's that H word. Humus is just the dead plant material. So think of leaves when they fall. Think of sticks when they fall off the trees too. So that was our loamy soil. Here's our next kind of soil. See if you can tell me the color of this soil. And how is this place different from the other locations we looked at? This should be the easiest type of soil for you guys to identify. It was my favorite soil because I got to play in it. This soil was almost powdery. I could actually write letters in the soil. Those are my initials. I found a little ant hanging out in that soil. It was very soft when I touched it. It did not form a ball at all. It kind of ran through my fingers, and it was so easy for me to push that science tool into the dirt. I only had to use one hand. Notice the color. How is it different from the other soils we looked at? So that was sandy soil. When it was dry, it was very, very grainy. And when it was wet, it was kind of soft and powdery. And it was also brown in color. So I'm gonna stop my screen share and I'm gonna show you one last thing. So here is my last soil type. This is soil for my vermicompost. It's just a box that has worms in it. So when I have leftover food, I put that leftover food inside a special box, and I have worms that will actually eat all that leftover food that I might have. So here's one of my little worm friends. It's a red worm. They actually eat that leftover stuff, and it helps to make nice nutrients for our soil. So there's my little friend there. And that's all I have for you guys for the soil color and texture. We're going to give it back to Dr. Gorman to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Maris. And a student asked, what are the different colors of soil? If you thought that all soils are brown, think again. Soil colors range from black to red to white. Sometimes it can even be blue. Soil color mostly comes from organic matter and iron. Topsoil is often dark because of the organic matter. An even single color indicates the soil is well drained. In contrast, rusty spots and gray patches, sometimes even a light blue in color, indicate poor drainage. And now Ms. Schramm is going to tell you about size and shape.
Hey friends, it's me, Ms. Schramm, and we are talking all about soil. But before I get going, I wanted to show you a little friend that I found in my potting soil. So I have a lot of plants in my classroom, and I was going around watering them one day, and I noticed a little friend peeking out. I was like, what on earth is this guy doing in here? I don't have any pets loose. And he is often found clinging on, maybe you've seen him clinging on the glass windows, maybe you've seen him camouflaging in a tree, or maybe you'll see him like how I have, nestled into the soil. So kind of think about who that could be. He likes to eat crickets, bugs, and other small insects. So let me see. If you guessed a frog, you would be correct. So this is my little friend. He is a common Mexican tree frog, and he wandered into my classroom and has been living here for a few weeks now. And I have him in this cage just so you could see him. But every morning or every time I like go through the plants and water them and tend to them and pick off dead leaves and things, I see him in a different pot. And I thought to myself, that's so strange. What is he doing in here? And then I thought about it, and I realized that he gets his hydration, like he gets his moisture from moisture in the environment. So if he goes in my plants that have just been watered, he can get that moisture from the soil. And also, I know that sometimes when we water houseplants, it attracts little flies and other insects. And I thought, well, maybe he's getting his moisture, his water, and his food source from sitting in the soil. So he's my little friend, and I keep him around because I don't like having all those flies and fruit flies hanging out around my plants. So I thought that was a funny creature because I don't usually think of frogs when I think of who's living in the soil, but he does. So that's good. All right, so let's do my little presentation. Okay. All right, all about soil. So at the end of my little section, you'll be able to observe, compare, and describe components of soil by size. So you've learned a lot about soil so far. So we're gonna try to focus on the size of those little particles in the soil. So you've heard these words already today, but we're gonna break down soil, and it comes in 4 main types. So we've got silt, clay, sand, and loam. And as we learned, soil comes in different colors, many different colors and textures. And a lot of those textures depend on the size of the components or the size of the particles. So if we look up close under a microscope with different soil particles, we can see the difference in the size. So if you look on the right, the one that's a drawing, it has a drawing of what sand looks like under a microscope. And of course, in real life, it's not perfect little circles, but the point is to show you that sand has larger particles and larger pore size, which is the air between. So if we look over here on the left, the picture that was taken from under a microscope, you could see 2 big particles. And then there's a lot of air in between. Then if you look at the next one, silt, you could see a bunch more circles, and they're smaller. They're medium size with medium air spaces or pores. So they've got smaller pieces and smaller air between them. And then of course, if you look over here, there's tons of medium-sized particles in that silt and like a medium amount of air between them. Then if you look at the last one, clay has teeny tiny, small, tightly packed with very little space between them particles. So those are teensy tiny. And then if you look over here at the microscopic picture, once again, you almost can't picture where the space ends and where the particles begin because they're so tightly packed. It just looks like almost one piece, but we can still see small pieces. All right, so enough of all that, and let's look at some soil samples. So let me see, make myself a little bigger so I can see what you see. Okay, so we are going to look at 6 different samples, and we're going to start with sand. So let me scooch it down this way. Ba-ba-da-ba. All right, we're going to start up here with sand. So you just saw some sand with Miss Ramirez, and she said it's so smooth and you can draw your name in it if it's wet, or you've played with this in your sandbox. So you know it's pretty small particles and it's pretty smooth, but we can still see some different colors in there, some bigger pieces, some smaller pieces, but it's still relatively small particles. All right, so I'm gonna set that in the sand sample. Then we have silt, which is next. So this silt is really, really fine. It's a really fine powder. And you can see there's less space between those particles because as I move it up, as I move it around, it's easy to smooth, right? And it almost looks like a flat surface if I smooth it out. So that is, ooh, and if I put it on my finger, it's hard to see the different particles. It just kind of looks like a really fine powder coating on my hands. Okay, then I found some soil from outside of my classroom. So this soil is still kind of moist from that rain we got last week, but you can see that this soil has little bits of clay and little bits of sand in it. So it's kind of a mixture, and it kind of packs up tight when you squish it around. So it's been a little wet, so I know there's some clay in there and I know there's some sand in there because I can almost pack it. All right, so I'm gonna put that there. Then a different kind of soil is potting soil. So this potting soil is like the kinds you purchase at the store. So if you are helping anyone garden or you're looking to pot some plants or something like that, you'll buy potting soil. And this soil is specially designed to help plants grow. And you can buy different kinds of potting soil depending on what kind of plants you are trying to grow. But this is typical potting soil. So it's really good for those plants to grow in. So it looks a little different than the natural soil. Then we have clay. So this clay is completely dry. So it's got different particles. And if I put them on my finger, you could still see the different particles, but they're really, really fine. And the way I can show that to you is if I show you a sample, the same clay, but with a little bit of water, it'll look more like the clay you're thinking of, like when you do art. So this is just with a little bit of water. It almost gets the consistency of like a gritty frosting. So it kind of looks like a little caramel frosting to me, but you can see it's really smooth and it's really tightly packed. If you were to play with it, it would feel just like what you think of as clay or Play-Doh. It's really squishy. You can fold it. I mean, you can mold it and all that, but I don't want to get messy, so I'm using a little spoon. Like it's almost kind of like peanut butter. All right, then I have my little loam. So this, you can see, if you look closely, there's bits of clay in there, there's bits of sand, just like that soil sample from out here at the EEC. We've got different pieces, different components that go into the loam. So we've got the regular soil, we've got clay, we've got sand. It's a mixture. All right. So that is not all I have for you today. Dear goodness. Okay, I was going to show you this sedimentary like separator tube, and this has gravel, sand, and silt in it. And if I, and also, yeah, and water, of course. So if I mix it up, all right, if I mix it up, it just looks all black, and I can hear the gravel in there. But to separate it out, I have to let it rest. And you can already see the big pieces are starting to rest first. But for this to really rest and show the different layers, it will take a long time, right? So this is like at the bottom of a pond or a river, what you might see. The gravel will be on the bottom, then there's gonna be the sand and the silt, and if there was clay, it would be on top. And then of course the water. But like I said, it takes a long time to rest. So this one you just watched me shake up, and some of it started to settle, but the water is not very clear at all. So let me show you one that's been sitting here since the morning. So you can see the different layers here, but even still, it's not clear water. Now, Ms. Ramirez is kind enough to share with me hers that she's had sitting in her cabinet since 2018, I believe. So that's 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021. That's 3 years it's been sitting there. So compared to this one for 3 hours, let's see what it looks like. Cannot drop it. All right, you could see it's way more clearly separated with gravel, the sand, the silt, and if there were clay, there would be a little layer there as well. And then here we've got the water, and it's much more clear, especially compared to the one that I just shook up with the same contents inside. So that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to see you next time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ram. You did have a question. What is the size of soil? Soil particles vary greatly in size, and soil scientists classify soil particles into sand, silt, and clay. Starting with the finest, clay particles are smaller than 2,000th of a millimeter in diameter. Some clay particles are so small that ordinary microscopes do not show them. Silt particles are from 2,000th millimeter to 500th of a millimeter. Thank you again, Ms. Ram. And now Mr. Monroe is going to tell you about the usefulness of soil.
Good afternoon, students. My name is Mr. Monroe, and we're going to learn a little bit about the usefulness of soil, why it is so important. Well, first of all, let's use our imagination. I want you to think about what would this world be like if there was no soil? In other words, if there was no dirt. It would look awful strange, wouldn't it? We wouldn't have plants. A lot of the animals that we know of, they wouldn't be here. In fact, life as we know it probably could not and would not exist on our planet. We'd probably look like some of those other planets that we see in some of those science fiction movies. No life. Wow, that would be pretty tough. Soil is very important. It's important to plants. It's important to animals that live here. And it's also important to people that inhabit our planet. Let's talk about some of those reasons why they're important. First of all, I'm going to start with plants. Plants go through a process called photosynthesis to make their own food. They take in water, sunlight, and a gas that we breathe out called carbon dioxide. They need those three components to make their own food. Now, they also need something else. They need stability. They need to be in one place and not moved around, basically. And soil or dirt helps that. I've got a coleus plant here that I kind of uprooted, and I need to get it back in the soil so that it will start getting some nutrients, meaning a little bit of food from the soil, because you heard Mr. Dominguez say that soil is made up of living and non-living components, right? Well, some of those non-living components are in the form of nutrients, almost like you would say vitamins, something else that plants might be able to use to nurture them. Well, this plant that I'm holding, this coleus plant, has a root system. Now, this root system is doing a couple of things for the plant. First of all, it's anchoring the plant in one place. Strong wind comes by, those roots are holding that plant in one place. If a lot of water comes swishing down, those roots are holding that plant in place. In fact, that wind and the water rushing over a plant would be considered erosion. Now, also, the roots pull water from the soil because a lot of the soil has it holds water, and it also pulls, again, nutrients to feed the plant. Most importantly, it allows the plant to stay vertical, to stand straight and tall all the way up, okay? Now, trees definitely need soil because their roots would be a lot bigger, a lot deeper, probably a lot more, then they definitely would need soil to hold them in place. And they would need a lot more nutrients than my coleus plants here, right? Now, as far as humans, you know, we depend on the soil. We know that we have farmers that raise crops. Those crops furnish food for people in the world today. And just like the rest of the animal kingdom, you know, we have to have a food source. Now, I guess the best way for me to describe that is if I was to step out and take a picture, and I should have done that earlier, of our pastures. And what I mean by pastures, we have flat areas out here at the Environmental Ed Center where there's grasses growing. And we have cows that are eating that grass. Can you imagine if the grass did not have the soil to grow in? What would those cows and the rest of our livestock, what would they have for food? What would we do without vegetables? Because vegetables are produced by plants. And what would we do without fruits? Because fruits grow on trees, and those fruit trees have to have soil because that's where they're going to be anchored, and that's where they're going to get their nutrients from that they need other than going through the process of photosynthesis. Now, soil, dirt, is also used in construction projects, such as building homes, building buildings, building roads and railways, and even constructing bridges. Dirt or soil is used in all of those projects, okay? Now, students, listen. Can you imagine our planet without having soil or dirt? Be pretty tough on us, but it'd even be harder on some of the animals that use soil as their habitat. We know that there are a variety of animals that make their shelters. You know, a good habitat, it furnishes shelter, food, and water for the animals that are making it its habitat. Armadillos, rabbits, raccoons, coyotes, they all love to burrow into the soil to make a home. We've even got smaller animals that do that also. Ms. Ramirez showed you a worm. You know, one of the things that I've always heard is that if you find an earthworm in the soil or dirt, that tells you that that soil or dirt is rich with nutrients. And there's a reason why. When that earthworm is consuming its food in the soil and it excretes its body waste, it is adding nutrients to the soil that's going to help plants grow big and strong. And of course, there are other little critters, other little organisms that would make their home in the soil. I've got a culture in here that I started at the first of the school year. And I started out by putting several pieces of wood that came from the Post Oak Preserve. These were pieces of dead wood coming from an oak tree. Since that time, I have noticed that some of that dead wood now looks like dirt, it's soil. And it was caused by a little animal that loves to eat wood and break it down so that it will be added to the soil to make kind of like new soil with lots of nutrients in it. And that little organism is called a Betsy bug or a best beetle. And I just happen to have one right here. That is a best bug. That's an insect that would live around dead wood and would probably be making its home or moving around in the moist soil underneath and around that piece of wood. So it is acting as what we call a decomposer, a recycler. It's recycling that dead wood and turning it into some stuff that will be added to the soil to give the soil nutrients to help the plants grow. Now, one more thing that is very interesting I want to show you is that along with the other animals that burrow into the ground to make their home there, you know, several of my favorite posters are titled Life Underfoot. Well, this little animal definitely would be life underfoot. In fact, I went out behind the classroom just a minute ago and I collected this. Looks like a piece of mud, but it's made up of little tiny balls. And what this is what they call a crawfish chimney. We have what we call grassland crawfish out here, and they burrow down into the dirt and soil. And when they burrow down, they ball up little balls of mud that they're actually moving out of the hole, and they pile it up around the entrance. Well, I found this one out there, so if I'd have taken a little time and I took a shovel and I would have dug down about a foot or two, maybe just a foot down below the chimney, that's what we call it, I would have found a crawfish, a grassland crawfish. In fact, I do have one to show you. This is what a grassland crawfish looks like. And if I stick my fingers around to the front of him, what do you think he might do? Not gonna bite me, but he would pinch me, okay? So there he is. So you can see, boy, without dirt, without soil, life as we know it on this planet probably couldn't exist the way that we know it. I'm gonna turn it back over to Dr. Gorman. So if any of you have any questions, I bet he can answer those for you. You guys have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Monroe. And a student asked, what is another use of soil? Soil provides ecosystem services critical for life. Soil acts as a water filter and a growing medium, provides habitat for billions of organisms, contributing to biodiversity, and supplies most, listen to this now, antibiotics used to fight diseases. I did not know that. So now we all learned something today. Now I am going to share my screen. This Properties of Soil program. During this virtual field trip, students observed and compared components of soil by size, texture, and color. Mr. Dominguez talked about types of soil, Ms. Ramirez, color and texture, size and shape by Ms. Schramm, and Mr. Monroe told you about how useful soil is. Teachers, we want to thank you for joining us today. If you would, go to www.tiny.cc/pk-2 feedback, fill out a very short form and send it back to us. It would help us in our programs. Thank you very much. Y'all have a great day. More importantly, have a great life.